Global analytics firm Gallup has unveiled its 2024 State of the Global Workplace report, and many of the findings provide some troubling data on the state of the world's workforce. In Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, stress levels are higher than the global average, as are levels of sadness and loneliness. What is driving this? And what can employers and employees do to make work-life better? What does it all mean for economic growth, business investment and public health? One more thing the report also finds is that global employee engagement also stagnated, and employee well-being declined in 2023 after multiple years of steady gains. So these are worrisome indeed. Let's talk about it with regional managing partner at Gallup, who joins us from Berlin in Germany, and this is Pa Sinyan. Pa, good morning and welcome to the program. Thank you very much for your time. Let's start here. What was the scope and the context for the study? Why was it important that we discuss stress, loneliness and sadness at work?
Thank you, man, for having me. And at Gallup, we feel that it's extremely important to study how people feel, not just what people experience on a day-to-day basis, because as we all know, feelings do translate into behaviors and facts. And one of our goals is to provide the world with statistics on everything important about life at work, and how we feel in life and in work, we feel is as important as everything else. And the scope of the study is really the world. Our goal is really to get a state of the global workforce. And we do this across, a representative sample of 98% of the world's population. So we really get a sense of how people are experiencing life and work in countries around the world.
So it's interesting because it gives us more of this sort of descriptor and profile around what's going on in places of employment. Just another quick question before we get into the substantive details, into some of the findings that you've made. What types of jobs are these employees that you were surveyed typically involved in?
Great question. And what's very important is to ensure representativeness, right? So in some countries, it's more of a production workforce we're talking about. So you take Germany, for example, where, over 30% of the workforce is in production. So we have an overrepresentation of production activities, so manufacturing type jobs. And then you have other economies where, it's more of a service economy. So we ensure representativeness in those countries by making sure that the population we survey in that organization is more likely to be in the service setting. So it's the key word really is representativeness by country, by region, and the world at large.
These would be formalized or informal jobs. Would they also be representative of jobs in the lower SEMs? In other words, people who might be transitory labor. Just give us a little more explanation on the demographic split.
Absolutely. So what we look to do is to actually capture the work condition people find themselves in, and we consider everybody to be an employee or everybody to be in a working capacity based on what they're spending their time doing. So if they in the survey are reporting that they've spent the last 6 hours a day at a minimum working in a job that they're paid for, we consider that to be somebody who's part of the global workforce. So that's how we define who we include in this study.
All right, so I want to dig into the findings now. And in Sub-Saharan Africa, nearly half of all employees are reporting experiencing a lot of stress, pegged at 48%, and the global average around 41%. Why would it seem that African workers are more stressed out? Interestingly, though, South African workers are experiencing less stress than their counterparts in Kenya, Senegal, and Zambia. What's responsible for that outcome?
Well, there are many things at play. So the perhaps obvious one is the workplace, because one of the things we do see in South Africa as well is a more engaging workplace environment. So yes, stress levels are high, but those of us fortunate to work when compared to our African peers, those blessed to be working in South Africa do experience more engaging leadership, meaning managers that make more time to give feedback, make more time to listen to their people, but also to hold them accountable and set clear expectations. And what the research confirms is that how we experience work, how engaged we are by our leaders and by our managers and by our workplace culture, that does have a spillover effect to how stressed we feel, how lonely we feel. So part of what we're seeing there is just a more engaged South African workforce population.
So similarly on sadness, South Africa rates are lower, together with Senegal at around 20% than in their counterparts in Kenya, Tanzania, and Guinea. What are the factors around this?
So all of those countries that are reporting higher negative emotions, as some them up as, also happen to be those where people are reporting less engaging work environment. So here too, I think that the work experience is one factor. Now, it's not the only factor. I think societal elements play a role. But I do think that work is one of the most actionable areas we have at our disposal. If we create more engaging teams, more engaging leaders, those employees that report to them are less likely to be sad, less likely to be lonely, and more likely to be thriving in life in overall.
Yeah, it just sounds to me like people need to be seen, Pa. They need to be recognized. They need to be valued in the places where they work, not only by their colleagues, but also by their seniors. I want to pull in very quickly before we talk about what it actually does mean in terms of corporate behavior, the loneliness factor. And this was so troublesome to read as well. Sub-Saharan Africa has the second highest regional percentage of employees experiencing loneliness. Why?
You know, as an African myself, I struggled with that one, I have to say, given, you know, and again, I'm playing to prejudices here, but, you know, we do know about how strong our social connections are, the levels of dependence and interdependence. So you would assume that strong sense of communities that we have in our societies across the African continent would result in less loneliness. Loneliness is a topic we've just started studying. We've been looking at it in the past, but we started tracking it now. And that was really a surprising factor. The only explanation I have currently is the workplace, because the data does back up that, you know, like you said, when people feel cared for at work, they build bonds and they build relationships. And we do see, sadly, that across the African continent, in South Africa, less than in many other African countries, but still, nevertheless, we see too many people saying, I don't feel cared for at work. I don't feel seen. My manager doesn't take time to set expectations. And that will disconnect us from where we spend most of our time, which is at work. So if we don't feel engaged at work, we will feel more lonely in life.
And, you know, again, as you say, you know, we live on a continent where, and for here in South Africa, the concept of Ubuntu, of seeing each other, of caring for people is higher than one would say culturally elsewhere in the world. So it is troubling to see this. And I'm sure a lot of people, but it's also common sense on many levels, isn't it, Pa, that if you do just make people feel valued, you know, they feel better at work, their stress levels are lower, their happiness levels are higher. And so, you know, it seems counterintuitive to not pursue that route. I want to quickly touch on remote employees. Fully remote employees are reporting significantly higher levels of loneliness. And again, some might say, well, that just seems to be obvious. 25% higher than those who work exclusively on site, and then the hybrid workers falling in between somewhere. Again, the social aspect missing from remote work, I imagine. But before you give us an explanation on that, how is loneliness defined, and how are people experiencing it?
Oh, great. Going back to the basics, I love that question. So indeed, it's important to understand, what are we measuring here? So we like to keep it simple at Gallup. We believe there's a lot of value in simplicity. So the question is really a simple one, which is, did you experience a lot of loneliness yesterday? So we're really asking people to think back immediately to what they're experiencing, what their norms are. And what we're reporting there is the percent of the population that is saying, actually, yes, I felt very lonely today. That is what we're actually reporting there. And that is something that the reason we've been studying that, because post-pandemic, we did see almost an epidemic of loneliness, stress, mental health challenges, and we're seeing that stay. So it did not go away. Now, to be fair, this wasn't caused just by COVID, but they did accelerate a negative trend we had been observing in our data over the last decades, which is just increasingly people are individualized, left to themselves, losing those bonds in our societies. I think social media plays a role. I think the fast pace of change we find ourselves in play a role, but increasingly people don't feel they're part of a community.
It's so interesting, and I'm sure it's not a challenge, but something to look at a little bit later is to maybe even dive a little deeper into these concepts and whether they are universally applicable, universally experienced in the same way. You know, is sadness, unhappiness, a feeling of isolation indicators of loneliness, or is it different from territory to territory? That's just probably more on an anthropological level. So we'll leave that out of this, the discussion for now, but it just occurred to me as we're talking. So what do we do with all this information? What should leaders, companies and organizations have to think about doing to make the workplace happier, more social and caring, even for those who are still in a remote working or a hybrid working environment?
Man, I think you really nailed it. And when you said, look, a lot of the lessons we're drawing from this is just the importance of leadership and the value that we have in should be more caring and more valuing of the people that work with us, for us. I think that's really the big takeaway from this, that there's just so much untapped potential in terms of how we lead and manage people. What the data tells us, just based on our estimates, and these are conservative estimates, if you ask me, the state of disengagement at work is costing the world almost 9 trillion annually. That's on productivity because people don't feel cared for at work. That's the number of mistakes people are making in their workplace because their managers don't give them feedback. The number of conflicts that are happening because we don't make time to create clarity and alignment on where are we trying to go, what are we trying to do. So I think the number one thing that leaders and organizations need to do is to recognize that this is not a nice to have. Stress, disengagement, these are not sort of nice to have concepts. These things have real life impact on our productivity, on our performance, but as you've just spoken about as well, on our well-being, how we feel in life and in work. And I think ownership of that is where leaders need to start. Just recognize that it's in our hands to influence how people experience life and work.
And we're in such a high-performance culture, aren't we, Pa? That there is sometimes, in fact, in a lot of cases, such a focus on pure performance, as in, you know, what are the numbers? How productive were you? And not on the holistic approach to work, which, as you say, is still going to cost the economy trillions of dollars if it doesn't pay attention to this. So it's counterintuitive in a sense that if you want people to perform and you want your company to survive and to be profitable, you've got to put a lot of attention into the people that actually show up for you every day.
At Gallup, we love to talk about the art and science of everything human. And I think the two things you've just described, which is that business dimension and the behavioral or emotional dimension, leaders need to understand these things are not at odds with each other. These things are complementary with each other. We cannot sustainably drive performance in a disengaging environment. We cannot sustainably drive innovation when people don't feel appreciated or cared for. We cannot sustainably drive productivity when we have employees, and that's 50% around the world, who go to work every day and don't know what is expected of them. So what we try to do in our partnerships around the world is really help organizations to understand these two things go hand in hand. By getting the behavioral and emotional dimension right, we're going to have a higher likelihood of achieving the outcomes we're looking for. So it's not distancing themselves, but really bringing them together that leaders need to work actively on.
Well, I'm going to end with a smile because given the information that you've just shared with us, I'm exponentially more happy to be in a very happy and productive work environment. And this is a nod to my team, those seen and unseen, who make coming to work every day for me a joy. But as you say, it's not the experience for everyone in the world, and that would be a great place to get to because we spend so much time at work. And actually, if we're not at work physically, we're thinking about going to work. And when we're at home, we're also thinking about work and answering emails first thing in the morning before we've opened both eyes. I hope you have a happy work environment as well, Pa.
I am fortunate and I am blessed. And if I may compliment you, the fact you take this moment to recognize your colleagues, that's exactly what we're looking for.
I'm expecting donuts in the break. Pa, take care. Thank you very much for sharing the details of that report. And this is the State of the Global Workforce report released by Gallup. Pa Sinyan there, the regional manager for the Europe, Middle East and Africa region.